Michelle Moyer was Dennis Rodman's wife for years until she fell into financial ruin due to his debts. Yolanda Smith divorced Joe Smith when she felt the walls crashing down on his career. Marvina Kemp was forced to reduce her lifestyle expenses due to her husband's careless decisions. Michelle Moyer, Dennis Rodman. He is one of the most singular figures in NBA history, not just as a player, but as a human being. 5 championships, multiple Defensive Player of the Year awards, a rebounding instinct that bordered on the supernatural. But if Iverson's collapse was about excess without malice, Rodman's was something else entirely. A spiral fueled by alcohol, erratic behavior, and a total disregard for financial responsibility. Michelle Moyer entered Rodman's life as his third wife when they married in 2003, and almost immediately, the relationship was turbulent. She filed for divorce in 2004, just 1 year into the marriage, though the two reconciled on and off in the years that followed, in a push-and-pull dynamic that dragged on until the marriage was finally dissolved around 2012. In 2012 was a significant year for Rodman. It was the year he was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame. It was also the year he was reportedly in financial ruin. By that point, Rodman owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in back child support and spousal support, with some reports placing the figure at over $500,000. And other accounts suggesting it climbed toward $850,000. He was found in contempt of court for refusing or being unable to pay. Complex magazine reported on the full scope of what Rodman owed, while the Sports Rush detailed how his refusal to meet those obligations was directly tied to his self-destructive behavior, the partying, the alcohol, the entourage, all of which cost money that Rodman no longer had. A TC law additionally documented the court orders that required Rodman to pay Michelle directly during the divorce proceedings, orders he repeatedly failed to meet. Michelle and Dennis have 2 children together. One of them, Trinity Rodman, has since become a professional soccer star in her own right, a remarkable outcome that says something about what her mother managed to build even after the financial chaos of that marriage. She isn't in good terms with her father, as she made obvious in one interview after that.
Did your dad call you and give you an atta girl after that one?
Nope, but my mom was there. She gave me a big old hug.
For Michelle Moyer, the Rodman years were a test of endurance. She married a legend, fought through an almost immediate divorce attempt, reconciled, and then spent years navigating courts while raising their children under the shadow of a man who seemed incapable of taking care of himself financially, let alone his family. If Rodman's story is a tale of self-destruction, our next entry is about a man whose downfall came not from partying, but from trusting the wrong people and hiding the wrong secrets. Yolanda Smith, Joe Smith. In 1995, Joe Smith was selected as the #1 overall pick in the NBA draft, a distinction that puts you in elite company at the very top of the basketball world. Over the course of his career, he earned approximately $61 million. That is a number that, managed wisely, could sustain multiple lifetimes. Joe Smith reportedly ended up with around $3,000 in the bank. To understand how that happened, you have to understand the spending patterns that defined his post-playing years, buying a house in every city he played in, maintaining a fleet of luxury cars, surrounding himself with advisors who weren't looking out for his long-term interests. It's a story that's painfully familiar in the NBA, but that doesn't make it any less devastating when the numbers hit you. His wife, Yolanda Smith, filed for divorce around 2011, and the timing was brutal. That was precisely the moment when NBA teams had stopped signing Joe Smith after his retirement. No new contracts, no new income. And the divorce, combined with the revelation of children he had fathered outside the marriage, children he had kept secret, created a financial and emotional catastrophe that compounded on itself. As Basketball Network reported, Smith went from $61 million to near zero, citing the divorce and escalating child support obligations as significant contributors to the collapse.
Did you think you were going to get picked up by another team after it was over?
Actually, before the lockout, I was kind of hopeful. The lockout.
Also, in an interview highlighted by Fadeaway World, Smith spoke openly about how Yolanda filed precisely when no NBA team wanted him, a moment of compounding failure that stings on multiple levels. The money was gone, the career was over, and now the marriage was too. What makes Yolanda Smith's story particularly painful is the context of those hidden children. She hadn't just married a man who spent recklessly, she had married a man who had kept enormous secrets from her. The financial damage was just the surface. Beneath it was betrayal. scandal. Joe Smith later appeared on television attempting to rebuild his finances, working with programs tied to Alex Rodriguez's business ventures. It's a redemption arc still in progress. But for Yolanda, the years of the marriage and its collapse represent something that no amount of television rehabilitation can fully undo. Where Joe Smith's collapse came from bad advice and hidden secrets, our next story features a man who didn't just spread his finances thin, he spread himself across an almost unimaginable number of households. BB Caffey, Jason Caffey. He won 2 NBA championships with the Chicago Bulls, which means he played alongside Michael Jordan at the absolute peak of his powers. He earned millions. He had rings. He had everything a professional athlete could want. He also had, depending on the source, somewhere between 8 and 10 children with multiple different women. The math, when you run it, is catastrophic. Caffey filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy around 2007, listing approximately $1.9 million in debts against about $1.15 million in assets. The primary driver of that collapse, child support obligations scattered across multiple households to multiple mothers, all coming due simultaneously. He was married to Baby Caffey. They had wed in 1998, and by 2006 she had separated from him, though the divorce had not yet been finalized at the time of the bankruptcy filing. Their shared home, an $800,000 property in Roswell, was awarded to Baby in the proceedings. The bankruptcy documents named several of the children's mothers as creditors, an extraordinary glimpse into just how complex Caffey's obligations had become. As documented by KS Family Law, Caffey was even arrested briefly over unpaid child support, a humiliating consequence for a man who had once stood at the summit of basketball. Basketball Network's coverage traces how the child support collapse unfolded over years, a slow-motion disaster that championship rings couldn't prevent. Bebe Caffey's experience is one of the quieter heartbreaks on this list. She entered a marriage with an NBA champion, built a life, raised children, and then watched as her husband's obligations to women and children outside their marriage consumed every financial resource he had. The home she received in the proceedings wasn't a prize, it was the remnant of something much larger that had already been lost. From a man undone by too many families, we now turn to a player whose financial chaos was so sprawling, it touched almost every woman in his life. Tammy Roman, Kenny Anderson. He was a gifted point guard who earned approximately $63 million over the course of his NBA career. He was, by all accounts, one of the more talented players of his era, and he was also, by his own admission and by the accounts of virtually everyone who dealt with his finances post-retirement, reportedly broke the day he left the NBA. The monthly expenses tell the story best. Estimates put his regular outgoings at over $40,000 per month. That covered an entourage, luxury living, and, most critically, child support for 7 children by 5 different women. 7 children. 5 women. A financial structure that was impossible to sustain the moment the NBA paychecks stopped arriving. Among the women in Kenny Anderson's life is Tammy Roman, a name basketball fans may recognize from the reality television series Basketball Wives. Tammy is the mother of 2 of Anderson's daughters, and in 2005, she filed a lawsuit against him for approximately $800,000 in unpaid child support, the accumulated arrears from missed monthly payments of around $8,500. As TMZ reported in 2012, that lawsuit was eventually settled, with the funds ultimately coming from Anderson's NBA pension, one of the few remaining financial lifelines available to former players. The New York Post reported on the cascading child support challenges he faced from multiple directions simultaneously, a financial avalanche that no amount of basketball talent could outrun. What's notable about Tammy Roman in this context is her public willingness to speak about the experience. Through her television appearances and interviews, she provided a window into what it actually means to be on the receiving end of an NBA player's financial collapse. It's not glamorous. It's years of missed payments, legal battles, and fighting for your children through a system that doesn't always make it easy. If Anderson's story is about spreading too thin, our next entry is about a player whose financial collapse was built across a different kind of excess, one without a single dramatic breaking point. Marvina Kemp, Shawn Kemp. He was one of the most physically gifted players of his generation, a power forward who could soar above defenses and finish with a ferocity that made highlight reels before highlight reels were a mainstream phenomenon. He earned over $90 million during his NBA career. He should have been set for life. Instead, by the time his playing days were truly behind him, Shawn Kemp's financial situation had been hollowed out almost entirely by child support obligations to 6, some reports say 7, children born to multiple women across different parts of the country. His wife Marvena Kemp, was pulled into financial ruin along with him. Unlike many of the entries on this list, Kemp's story doesn't center on one primary wife or a single formal marriage that ended in divorce proceedings. His financial collapse was built across a series of relationships and obligations, each adding another thread to a web that eventually became impossible to maintain. What makes his story particularly striking is the timeline. The Seattle Times was reporting on how these child support obligations were affecting his performance and focus as far back as 1998, while he was still actively playing. That's how early the pressure had set in. Basketball Network's in-depth look at Kemp documents how a $90 million career ultimately dissolved, not through one catastrophic decision, but through the slow bleed of obligations that accumulated faster than anyone could manage. Kemp later attempted various business ventures, including entering the cannabis industry, but his net worth at various points post-retirement was estimated near zero. The properties he offered to settle debts painted a picture of a man selling off the last remnants of a fortune that once seemed inexhaustible. The women in Kemp's story, the mothers of his children, including Marvena Kemp, occupy a complicated position. They are both the recipients of support payments and the holders of obligations that Kemp couldn't or wouldn't consistently meet. Their children grew up in households where the father's financial chaos was an ever-present reality. Kemp's story is one of the starkest examples on this list precisely because it lacks a single dramatic breaking point. There's no one bankruptcy headline, no one foreclosure story, just a fortune gradually consumed by a life that required more than any one man could sustain. From a man whose obligations multiplied quietly across relationships, we turn to a player whose ruin began with one of the most famous contract rejections in basketball history. Candace Cabell, Latrell Sprewell. In 2004, Latrell Sprewell made one of the most infamous statements in NBA history. He turned down a contract extension worth $21 million, explaining that it wasn't enough to feed his family. At the time, people laughed. In retrospect, it reads more like a tragedy than a punchline, because within a few years of that rejection, Sprewell didn't have enough money to cover his own expenses. The financial collapse that followed his post-retirement years is well documented. Foreclosures, mounting debt, and perhaps most symbolically, the repossession of a yacht worth approximately $1.5 million, a luxury item purchased at the height of his earning power and no longer maintainable. ESPN reported on the yacht repossession as one of the more visible markers of just how dramatically Sprewell's circumstances had shifted. Basketball Network detailed how the accumulated debt ultimately forced the sale, a public symbol of a private catastrophe. Now it's worth noting something specific about Sprewell's entry in this video. Unlike many of the men on this list, no formal marriage has been confirmed in the reports surrounding his financial collapse. What is documented is that he had a long-term partner, the mother of his 4 children, Candace Cabell, who filed a civil lawsuit against him in 2007, claiming over $200 million in damages, alleging broken promises of financial support. $200 million. The scale of that lawsuit alone tells you something about the magnitude of what was at stake for the woman in his life and what she believed she had been promised. Sprewell reportedly settled various debts to avoid losing his home entirely, but the financial wounds from this period were deep and lasting. A man who had earned over $100 million across his career found himself navigating foreclosures and legal battles that no level of basketball talent could have prepared him for. The lesson Sprewell's story offers is a painful one. Talent doesn't translate to wisdom, and a contract you reject in a moment of pride cannot be unrejected when the bills start arriving. The people closest to him, including the mother of his children, bore the weight of those decisions right alongside him. If Sprewell's ruin came from a mix of arrogance and lifestyle costs, our next story features a player whose financial collapse was accelerated by something that sounds almost too absurd to believe. Patrice Curry, Eddie Curry. He was a center with genuine NBA potential, a big man who earned over $70 million across his career. He had size, skill, and the resources to build a comfortable post-basketball life. Instead, by the end of his playing days, he was dealing with foreclosures, unpaid jewelry bills totaling nearly $1 million in a single case, and a child support situation that was, frankly, beyond ordinary comprehension. Here's where the story becomes remarkable. Curry was previously married, and the divorce proceedings that followed became a financial minefield unlike most others on this list. Reports detail how his ex-wife allegedly convinced him to make child support payments directly to her, payments that were then legally classified as gifts rather than as official support contributions. The consequence, courts ruled that those payments didn't count toward his official obligations, meaning he was required to pay the same money again. Basketball Network reported that this reportedly cost Curry approximately $1 million in duplicated payments, $1 million paid twice for a combined loss of around $2 million. And on top of that, Ongoing spousal support of approximately $9,000 per month continued for years after the separation. As Hoops analysts documented, the Curry story is in many ways the purest illustration of the financial literacy gap that plagued so many players of his era. He had money, he had obligations, and he had relationships, personal and legal, that he trusted to structure those obligations fairly. That trust cost him enormously. The woman in Curry's story remains largely a figure in court documents rather than a public name, but the shape of her experience, navigating divorce, fighting through support battles, dealing with the financial chaos of a relationship with a professional athlete whose resources were already unraveling, mirrors the experience of so many women on this list. From a man whose own generosity was used against him, we move to a story that played out in full public view, on television, in tabloids, and eventually in the courts. Jennifer Williams, Eric Williams. He earned nearly $40 million over the course of his NBA career. He was not the most famous player of his generation, but he made real money. Money that, by the end of his playing days, was largely gone. His wife, Jennifer Williams, became famous in her own right as a cast member of the VH1 reality series Basketball Wives, a show that placed the experiences of NBA partners and ex-partners directly in front of a national audience. Jennifer was articulate, sharp, and remarkably candid about what life inside an NBA marriage actually looked like from the inside. She filed for divorce in 2011, citing infidelity and the general dysfunction of a relationship that had been straining for years. The New York Daily News reported on the divorce filing as a breaking story, a reflection of how public their lives had become through the reality television platform. But the divorce itself was anything but quick. The Christian Post documented a prolonged and contentious process that played out not just in courtrooms, but on social media, including Twitter battles between the two that gave followers a real-time window into the bitterness of the proceedings. Jennifer Williams' story is significant in the context of this video because she is one of the few women on this list who stepped forward and spoke publicly about her experience. Through Basketball Wives, she described the dysfunctional reality of NBA wife life, the pressures, the infidelity, the money, and the eventual collapse. She gave a face and a voice to an experience that most of the other women on this list endured in private. What happened to Eric Williams financially followed the familiar patterns: spending, lifestyle inflation, and no clear plan for post-basketball income. By the time the divorce was finalized, reports described him as struggling significantly. A man who had once been a professional athlete reduced to a far more precarious financial reality. Jennifer Williams, for her part, has continued to build her own brand and business interests since the divorce, a reminder that the collapse of these marriages, as painful as it was, did not have to be the end of the story for the women involved. Our final entry is about a man whose financial collapse was perhaps the most straightforward on this list, and whose story serves as the ultimate reminder that fortune is not the same thing as wisdom. Gina Coleman, Derek Coleman. He was the #1 pick in the 1990 NBA draft. Over his career, he earned approximately $91 million, a fortune by any measure, and the kind of financial foundation that should have set him and everyone around him up for life. In 2010, Derek Coleman filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The filing listed approximately $4.7 million in debts against roughly $1 million in assets, a gap that told the story of years of financial mismanagement with brutal clarity. Yahoo Sports covered the filing extensively, and Basketball Network's Deep Dive traced how the #1 pick of the 1990 draft went from $91 million to bankruptcy in the years that followed his playing career. The patterns were familiar: lavish lifestyle costs, spending that compounded over years without adequate planning, and investments that didn't deliver. The personal family obligations during and around his retirement added further financial strain, though the specific details of his marriage during this period are less thoroughly documented than some of the other entries on this list. What Coleman's story contributes to this video is a kind of bookend, a reminder that the financial collapse of these NBA legends wasn't random or unique. It was the predictable outcome of a set of behaviors and blind spots that repeated themselves across generation after generation of professional athletes. The numbers changed, the players changed, the women standing beside them changed, but the pattern was always the same: enormous wealth, absent systems, and the people closest to them left to navigate the wreckage. Coleman has since made some partial recovery through media appearances and business ventures, as have several others on this list, but the money that was lost, $91 million, reduced to near nothing, can never truly be recovered. Our last case is rather different. While other wives pulled their husbands down, this one saved him from financial ruin. Tawana Turner, Allen Iverson. Let's start at the top, and we mean that literally. Allen Iverson was one of the most electrifying players the NBA has ever seen. The cornrows, the crossover, the scoring titles. The man was a force of nature, and his career earnings reflected that. Over $200 million between his NBA salary and endorsement deals, most notably his legendary partnership with Reebok. By any reasonable measure, Allen Iverson should have retired as one of the wealthiest athletes of his generation. Instead, he nearly ended up with nothing. Iverson had been with Tawana Turner since high school, the kind of love story that sounds almost too cinematic to be real. They married in 2001, and together they had 5 children. But behind the scenes, the cracks were forming well before the public ever noticed. The spending was extraordinary. Not just generous, not just lavish, extraordinary. Iverson reportedly bought jewelry, luxury cars, and designer clothes on a near daily basis, often without even packing luggage for the clothes, simply purchasing brand new outfits at every city he visited. His entourage traveled with him everywhere, and everyone ate well. The problem was that the money was flying out far faster than anyone was keeping track of. By 2010, Tawana had seen enough. She filed for divorce, and the proceedings pulled back the curtain on just how bad things had gotten. In a 2012 court hearing, Iverson reportedly claimed near zero cash flow, despite monthly expenses that were said to be running at approximately $360,000, $360,000 every single month for a man no longer drawing an NBA paycheck. According to the NY Daily News, the bankruptcy chaos of this period was detailed extensively in a biography that painted a portrait of just how far one of basketball's brightest stars had fallen. But here's where Tawana Turner's role becomes more complicated than most people realize. Despite the divorce filing in 2010, and despite all the chaos, she didn't simply walk away. There was, remarkably, a temporary reconciliation. And even more remarkably, reports indicate that Tawana helped Iverson access a Reebok trust fund worth approximately $32 million, a financial lifeline she helped preserve for him even amid the divorce proceedings. As Newsbreak and Finura reported, her gesture allowed him to retain half of that trust fund despite the settlement, a level of generosity that's easy to overlook when the headline simply reads, "Went broke." The divorce was finalized in 2013. Iverson has since spoken candidly about that period as one of his lowest points, but Tawana's story is ultimately one of a woman who stayed, sacrificed, and helped a man she loved survive his own recklessness, even as that recklessness cost her dearly too. 10 stories, 10 fortunes, and at the center of every single one, a woman who didn't sign up for bankruptcy filings, contempt of court hearings, or watching a yacht get repossessed. Tawana Turner stayed and sacrificed. Michelle Moyer raised champions on her own. Yolanda Smith was betrayed by secrets she never knew existed. Bebe Caffey walked away with a house that was just the last thing standing. Jennifer Williams turned her pain into a platform. These women didn't just survive the collapse, some of them outlasted it entirely. But here's the truth that every single one of these stories points to. The money was never really the problem. The problem was the absence of systems, no financial literacy, no real accountability, no one in the room willing to say stop. And by the time anyone did, it was already too late. Today's NBA players have more resources, more education, and more warning than any generation before them. They have these stories. The question is whether they're listening, because the game ends for everyone. The contracts stop, the crowds go home. What remains is what you built or what you failed to. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.